The Aethelian hegemony believed in a clean galaxy, one where history was a neatly cataloged collection of artifacts, not a living, breathing force. Their grand vessel, the Stellarch's will, was a testament to this philosophy, a city-sized blade of sterile white alloy and silent, gravitic engines that moved through the void without a whisper. Aboard it, Praetor Jax personified the hegemony's soul, disciplined, incurious, and utterly convinced of his own benevolent supremacy. His current task was a footnote in the grand ledger of galactic pacification, the survey of a dormant star system designated Cinder 784, a system the ancients had called Sol. The system was a relic, its third planet a shattered ball of glassed continents and irradiated dust, a testament to a long-dead species that had, according to the archives, consumed itself in a final, fiery spasm of primitive violence. The hegemony had cataloged it 2 centuries ago, deemed it unworthy of resource extraction, and moved on. Yet, a faint looping energy signature had been detected from one of the system's outer moons, a frozen methane rock orbiting a gas giant. It was a gnat's buzz in the symphony of the cosmos, but protocol demanded it be identified and silenced. So, the Stellarch's will hung in the black, a monument of order in a dead place, while Jax watched the primary view screen. "Report," he commanded, his voice as clipped and precise as the angles of the bridge. The tactical officer, a young acolyte with perfectly slicked antennae, answered without turning. The signature originates from a subterranean vault on the Moon Titan. Praetor, ancient construction, pre-collapse human. Our scans indicate it's a repository of some kind. No active defenses, no life signs, just a low-power emission, likely a failing power source. Jax tapped a chrome finger on his command throne's armrest. Humans. He vaguely recalled the file, a chaotic, self-destructive race that had briefly touched the stars before imploding. Their artifacts were curiosities, studied by hegemony scholars for their primitive pathos. "Send down a curator team," Jax ordered. "Catalog anything of interest. Sterilize the rest. I want the signal silenced before the next cycle. It is an untidy variable in an otherwise settled equation." He felt a familiar, faint wave of satisfaction. This was the hegemony's purpose, to sweep away the dust of failed civilizations, to bring quiet, sterile order to the chaos of the past. Below, on Titan's frozen surface, the curator team descended. Their suits crunched on hydrocarbon frost under the dim, distant light of the sun. The vault door, buried beneath millennia of icy sediment, was a marvel of archaic engineering. A simple slab of tungsten alloy that slid open with a low groan as their energy cutters breached its seal. Inside, the air was cold, still, and impossibly ancient. It was not a tomb or a military bunker. It was a library or a museum. Alcoves lined the walls, each containing a single object suspended in a stasis field, a leather-bound book with gilded pages, a violin carved from some extinct terrestrial wood, a canvas splattered with colored pigments in a pattern of breathtaking agony and beauty. A dispassionate drone floated through the halls, its optical sensors recording everything for the archives. The lead curator, a being named Lyra, ran a 3-fingered hand over the smooth, cool surface of a marble sculpture depicting a human female with a serene, enigmatic smile. Such wasted sentiment, she murmured into her comms, her voice a mixture of pity and contempt. All this effort to preserve memories that no one is left to remember. In the central chamber, they found the source of the signal. It was not a power core, but a crystal lattice, a data storage device of immense complexity, humming with the last dregs of its energy. It was projecting a simple, repeating message into the void, a string of mathematical constants and primitive musical tones, a final, desperate hello to an empty universe. This is the source. Praetor, Lyra reported. A data archive. We are preparing to extract its contents before neutralization. Jax watched on his screen from the serene comfort of his bridge. Proceed. The extraction process was delicate. The drone extended a probe, its tip glowing with a soft blue light as it prepared to interface with the crystal. The moment it made contact, however, something changed. The low hum of the crystal ceased. For a single, heart-stopping second, the entire vault was plunged into absolute darkness and silence. Then, a new light bloomed from the crystal's heart, not a soft hum, but a searing, violet pulse that flashed once, bathing the chamber in its glare. The drone's camera feed went to static. Lyra report. Jax commanded, his placid demeanor finally cracking. Silence. Curator team. What is your status? Only the whisper of interstellar radiation answered. On the bridge of the Stellarch's will, alarms began to chime, soft at first, then rising in a frantic crescendo. The tactical officer spun around, his antenna twitching in agitation. Praetor, the vault. The entire structure is dissolving. Our surface sensors are reading a molecular deconstruction event. There is no energy release, no radiation, no blast. It's just vanishing. Jack stood, his eyes locked on the tactical display. A gray patch was spreading from the vault's location, a patch of utter nothingness that was consuming the ice, the rock, the very matter of the moon's surface. It was expanding exponentially, a silent, featureless tide of erasure. Pull back, he snapped. All forces, immediate withdrawal, but it was too late for the landing craft. Its signal simply winked out of existence, not with an explosion, but with an abrupt cessation. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, as if it had never been. The gray tide continued to spread, a hole being eaten in reality itself. It was not violent. It was not loud. It was a calm, creeping oblivion. And that was the most terrifying thing Jax had ever witnessed. He watched as the tide consumed a third of Titan's surface before it stopped, leaving a perfectly smooth, non-reflective scar on the face of the moon. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than any he had ever known. The untidy variable had not been silenced. It had become a terrifying new equation, 1,000 light-years away. In the Kuiper Belt, a hegemony patrol frigate, the Vigilance, was investigating a derelict asteroid mining station. Its captain logged a final, confused report before his ship, 2, ceased to exist. Command, we have a strange sensor reading. It's like a cloud of static moving through the void. There's no mass, no energy. It's just, stars. It's touching the hull. The ship is, The transmission ended. In the weeks that followed, the reports multiplied. A listening post in the Oort cloud went silent. A cargo hauler on the Neptune run vanished. A squadron of enforcers sent to investigate disappeared without a trace. There was no wreckage, no distress calls, no energy signatures of a battle. There was only a spreading, silent absence. The hegemony, for the first time in its 1,000-year history, was facing an enemy it could not see, could not fight, and could not comprehend. They called it the Silent Plague, the Gray Enigma, the Void Blight. It was a ghost in the machine of their perfect, orderly galaxy, and deep within the scarred moon of Titan, in a secondary bunker buried 1,000 kilometers beneath the one the hegemony had desecrated, another system stirred. This bunker was not a library of things, but a sanctuary for a single life. For 300 years, the facility had been dormant, its sole purpose to wait. The violet pulse from the archive above had been a key, a signal that the lock had been broken. Cryostasis systems began to reverse, their gentle hum the first sound to grace the chamber since the fall of Earth. Frost melted from a transparent pod, revealing the form of a woman, her face pale and peaceful in the induced sleep. Her name was Elara Vance, and she had once been a historian. A cascade of information began to flood the monitors around her, data feeds that had lain dormant for centuries. They showed the vault's desecration, the activation of a contingency she had only ever read about in classified files. They called it the Gray Tide, a swarm of self-replicating nanomachines designed as Earth's final, spiteful act of defiance. Their directive was simple, absolute, and horrifying: to find the unique biosignature and energy frequency of the species that had violated Earth's resting place and erase it from existence. Slowly, Elara's eyes fluttered open. Her first breath was a painful gasp of recycled air, cold and tasting of metal and time. She sat up, her movements stiff, her mind a fog of cryo-induced confusion. The central monitor in front of her pod lit up, displaying a direct feed from a deep space probe. She saw a squadron of hegemony cruisers, their proud white hulls gleaming against the black. And then she saw the Gray Tide. It moved like a current of smoke, a formless, roiling cloud of utter negation. It washed over the first cruiser, and the great ship simply dissolved, its lines blurring and fading like a watercolor painting in the rain. There was no fire, no sound, no struggle. One moment, a warship, the next, empty space. The cloud moved on, and the next ship vanished, and the next, and the next, until only the void remained. Elara stared, her historian's mind, trained to catalog and understand the past, struggling to comprehend the present. She was not a commander. She was not a soldier. She was a keeper of memories, a guardian of ghosts. And she had just awoken to discover that one of those ghosts had been given a sword that could unmake the universe. She was alone, the last living human, adrift in a tomb of her own species, and she was now inextricably tied to a silent, ever-expanding plague of vengeance that was about to consume a galactic empire. The weight of that realization settled upon her, not like a mantle of power, but like the crushing pressure of a deep sea. What had they done? What had she just become a part of in the silence of her tomb, surrounded by the echoes of a dead world? Elara Vance began to weep, her sobs the first truly human sound in the Sol system in 300 years. Praetor Jax did not return to the hegemony's core worlds in triumph. The Stellarch's will, once a gleaming symbol of order, limped back to the fortified starbase at Cygnus Alpha, its hull plating unscratched, but its spirit broken. News of the Silent Plague was suppressed, quarantined behind layers of military encryption. But fear, like radiation, has a way of leaking out. Jax was stripped of his command in a cold, sterile ceremony that was more of an administrative transfer than a punishment. The hegemony did not deal in passion, it dealt in efficiency, and Jax's encounter with the unknown had been catastrophically inefficient. He was reassigned to a windowless office in the station's archives, tasked with collating every fragment of data on the extinct species from Cinder 784. It was a humiliating, clerical exile, but Jax accepted it with a chilling focus that unnerved his superiors. He had looked into an abyss of absolute negation, and the orderly patterns of his old life no longer held any meaning. All that mattered was understanding the shape of the void that had stared back. The hegemony's response was predictable and massive. They established the Silent Zone, a perimeter of armed dreadnoughts and sensor buoys spanning 100 light years, a cage built around the spreading stain of the plague. No ship was permitted in or out, but the cage was leaking. The plague did not travel through space in a conventional sense. It seemed to simply arrive. A colony on the fringe world of Xylos, well outside the quarantine, reported its atmospheric processors had gone offline. When a patrol arrived, they found a planet of perfect, silent stillness. Every structure, every life form, every blade of grass dissolved into a uniform gray dust. The plague wasn't just a weapon. It was a contagion of entropy, and it was spreading. This escalation brought a new figure into the crisis, High Inquisitor Kalen, a gaunt, severe Aethelian whose division was responsible for purging ideological and technological heresy. Kalen saw the plague not as an enemy, but as a philosophical impurity, a chaotic element that had to be scoured from the clean slate of the galaxy. He commandeered the investigation, viewing Jax not as a disgraced commander, but as a contaminated witness, the first to be touched by this new heresy. You describe it as a tide of nothingness, Praetor, Kalen said, his voice a dry rustle in the sterile quiet of Jax's archive office. His eyes, the color of polished slate, never blinked, a nonsensical descriptor. Everything is something. This is a weapon, and all weapons have a point of origin, a creator, and a weakness. Jax looked up from a flickering data slate displaying the primitive, angular script of the long-dead humans. The weakness of a forest fire is that it consumes its own fuel. This weapon does not seem to require any. It consumes matter and leaves behind an absence of matter. It is a flaw in physics, a wound in reality. Kalen's lips thinned into a razor line. Reality does not have flaws. Our understanding does. You will continue your work. Find the heart of this human filth. Find the mind that built it. I will assemble the unmaking fleet. We will not cage this chaos. We will cauterize it at its source. Meanwhile, Ilara Vance was learning the truth of her inheritance. The bunker, which she now knew was designated sanctuary, was more than a tomb. It was a legacy. As she explored its silent, dust-free halls, systems came online around her, responding to her unique biosignature. She was the key. She found the central archive, a spherical chamber where the walls themselves were the data crystal, glowing with the collected knowledge of a doomed world. Here, she found the file for the weapon that was now savaging the galaxy. It wasn't called the Grey Tide. Its designation was Project Memento Mori, a reminder of death. It was the brainchild of Earth's most brilliant and most desperate minds, a doomsday weapon born in the planet's final, agonizing hours. The nanites were not just machines. They were semi-sentient, quasi-biological constructs, programmed with a single, inviolable directive. They were key to the genetic and energetic signature of the first species to desecrate the Titan Vault, the designated violator. Once triggered, their purpose was to seek out that specific signature anywhere in the universe and deconstruct it at a molecular level. It was a weapon of pure targeted genocide, a final scream of a dying species that had decided if they could not live, they would ensure their killers would be unlived. Alara's blood ran cold as she absorbed the details. There was no off switch, no recall command. The project's creators had ensured it would be an unstoppable, autonomous force, a ghost that could never be exorcised. But there was one final, terrifying component to the design: the anchor, a single human preserved in cryostasis, whose own biosignature would act as a stable, friendly beacon to the swarm. The anchor was not a master, but a shepherd. The swarm would never deconstruct its anchor and would, on a subconscious level, use the anchor's location as a navigational and existential baseline. She was not its commander. She was its home. The realization was a physical blow. She stumbled back from the glowing wall, gasping for air. Every Aethelian that dissolved into nothingness was being murdered in her name by a weapon that saw her as its guiding star. The Silent Zone became a graveyard. The hegemony sent in drone fleets, remote probes, anything to gather data without sacrificing more crews. But the plague was learning. A convoy of refugee ships fleeing a world near the zone's edge was not immediately consumed. Instead, the formless gray cloud split, herding the convoy like a wolf herding sheep, pushing them deeper into contaminated space before finally, mercifully, ending their terror. The plague was exhibiting tactical awareness. It was a predator, and it was toying with its prey. In his archive, Jax discovered fragmented references, buried in the last transmissions from Earth's final days. They spoke of a librarian, a guardian of the archives, a last-ditch effort to preserve the species' soul, if not its body. He found references to a deep Earth facility, a sanctuary, designed to outlast the death of the sun itself. He correlated the data with the energy signature he had first detected. The signal hadn't come from the vault. It had come from somewhere deeper, infinitely deeper. He brought his findings to Kalen. The weapon may be autonomous, Jax argued, standing before the Inquisitor's holographic form, but its origin, its core programming, may still reside at its point of creation. There is something still alive in that system. Inquisitor, a mind, or the echo of one. Kalen was silent for a long moment. You propose we send a fleet back to the source of the contagion. I propose we send a single ship. A scalpel, not a hammer. I will lead the expedition. Kalen's expression was unreadable. If you are correct, you will be facing the mind that architected the death of billions. If you are wrong, you will be annihilated. The hegemony will disavow all knowledge of your mission. Accepted, Jax said without hesitation. In the heart of the sanctuary, Alara had moved from horror to a desperate, hardened resolve. If she was the weapon's anchor, then there had to be a connection. She couldn't stop it, but could she influence it? Steer it, slow it down. The archives contained one last file, sealed with a psycho-reactive lock that only opened when her mind was in a state of extreme duress. It detailed the true nature of the anchor protocol. It was a two-way street. The swarm used her as a beacon. But she, in turn, could feel the swarm. She could connect to its distributed consciousness. A network of trillions upon trillions of nanites all acting as one. The file came with a single, stark warning: to touch the mind of Memento Mori was to touch the collective, undiluted rage and grief of every human who died in Earth's fall. It was an ocean of psychic agony that could shatter any mind that tried to embrace it. But there was no other choice. Elara entered the central chamber, the glowing heart of the archive, and knelt. She closed her eyes, filtering out the hum of the life support and the cold silence of the bunker. She focused inward, on the spark of life that the swarm recognized as its own. She reached out with her thoughts, not with a command, but with a plea, a question, a single, lonely voice calling out into a storm of silent, screaming ghosts. For the first time, she tried to speak to the plague, and somewhere in the cold dark between worlds, the storm paused, its trillion eyes turning inward to look back at the last human in the universe. The connection was not a voice in her head. It was a drowning. The moment Ilara's consciousness touched the swarm, she was ripped from the sterile quiet of the sanctuary and plunged into a roiling, infinite ocean of sensation. It was the collective death rattle of a species, a symphony of every final, agonizing moment from Earth's last day. She felt the searing heat of orbital bombardment on her skin, the crushing weight of collapsing cities in her bones, the choking dust of continents turning to ash in her lungs. She heard the screams of mothers, the final, confused questions of children, the defiant curses of soldiers, all layered one on top of the other into a single, unending shriek of psychic noise that threatened to tear her sanity apart. This was Memento Mori's soul, a monument of pure, undiluted anguish, weaponized and set loose upon the stars. There was no single intelligence here, no central node to reason with. It was a hive mind of grief, its every action a reflex born of its trauma. It erased the Aethelian hegemony not out of strategic malice, but because their signature was the other, the cause, the focal point for an ocean of pain that had been given a direction. The swarm felt her, a tiny, terstable island of warmth in its cold, raging sea. It did not understand her plea, her attempt at command. It simply recognized her as self, a part of the whole that was not screaming. It drew closer to her consciousness, not to obey, but to share its burden, to show its anchor the truth of its existence. Images, not her own, flooded her mind, the face of an Aethelian curator, Lyra, her expression a mixture of clinical curiosity and faint pity just before the vault's contingency triggered and she was unmade. The panic on the bridge of a hegemony cruiser as the ship's very atoms began to unspool. The silent, terrified faces of a family on Xylos as their world dissolved around them. The swarm was showing her its work, not with pride, but with the grim, relentless logic of a force of nature. This is what was done to us. This is what we now do to them. The feedback loop was unbearable. Ilara screamed, not with her voice, but with her mind, a raw projection of her own horror and despair into the hive. She tried to sever the connection, to pull back into the safety of her own skull, but the swarm held on, its trillion-fold grief a current too strong to fight. She was losing herself, her identity dissolving into the larger, more powerful agony of the collective. She was no longer Ilara Vance, historian. She was becoming just another dying human, Another voice in the choir of the damned. Aboard a single experimental stealth vessel, the Penumbra. Jax moved through the silent zone like a whisper. The ship was a marvel of hegemony Black Ops engineering, its hull coated in sensor-baffling metamaterials, its drive a modified gravitic engine that left no discernible wake. It was a ghost ship on a ghost hunt. Kalen had given him the best. But the mission was still considered a foregone failure, a final desperate variable to be tested before the Inquisitor resorted to his own, more brutal solutions. Jax stood on the bridge, a space barely large enough for his three-person crew, and watched the star charts. They were charting a course back to Cinder 784, back to the source. His navigator, a stoic female Aethelian named Ryan, piloted the ship with unnerving calm. "We are detecting residual deconstruction events. Praetor," she reported, her voice flat. "Pockets of the plague. Adrift. They are not active, more like echoes." Jax nodded, his eyes fixed on the forward scanner. "It is not a mindless force. It has a territory. A hunting ground. We are moving through its den while the predator is away." He'd spent every waking moment since his reassignment studying the human race. He'd learned their chaotic history, their art, their philosophies of hope and despair. He'd come to understand them not as a failed species, but as a tragically volatile one, capable of creating breathtaking beauty and unimaginable horror with equal passion. Project Memento Mori was not just a weapon, it was a human artifact. It was a suicide note written in the language of physics. And, like any text, he believed it could be read, and its author found. Their destination was not Titan, but the shattered third planet itself. Earth. Jax's hypothesis was radical. The vault on Titan was a trigger, a doorbell, the true source of control. The mind he sought would be located in the safest, most fortified place the humans could have conceived the dead, irradiated heart of their own fallen world. No one would ever think to look there. As the Penumbra slipped past the orbit of a red, lifeless Mars, a new alert chimed on Rian's console. "Praetor, I have a signal." Faint. It is not Aethelian. It matches the frequency profile of the original Titan emission, but it's different. It's structured. Not a loop. It's a transmission. Jax moved to her side, his gaze locking onto the data stream. It was a burst of complex information, repeating on a secure, encrypted channel. It took the ship's computers hours to decipher the archaic human encryption. When it finally broke, the message that appeared on the screen was a single, desperate plea. Help. Anchor compromised. Sanctuary protocol failing. Memento Mori unbound. Help. Jack stared at the words, a cold certainty solidifying in his gut. Anchor. Sanctuary. These were the terms from the fragmented files. He was right. Someone was alive, and they were in trouble. It's a trap. His tactical officer, a young, jumpy male named Koro, muttered from the back of the bridge. "The plague is luring us in." "No," Jax countered, his voice quiet but firm. "The plague does not use language. It does not ask for help. It erases. This is the mind I've been searching for." "Rian, can you triangulate the signal's origin?" Rian's fingers flew across her console. "The transmission is weak, bouncing off old satellite debris. But the source vector is clear. It is originating from the planet's surface. A polar region deep beneath the ice caps. Take us in." Jax commanded. Back in the sanctuary, Ilara was broken. She had managed to retreat from the swarm's consciousness, but the experience had scarred her. She felt its presence now as a constant, low thrum at the edge of her thoughts, a phantom limb of collective agony. Her desperate transmission, a pre-programmed distress call she had activated in her final moments of lucidity, had been a shot in the dark, a message in a bottle thrown into an uncaring sea. She didn't know if anyone had received it, or if anyone was even left to receive it. The connection had changed her. She now understood the plague's trajectory. It was not expanding randomly. It was moving with purpose, sweeping through Aethelian space in a tightening spiral, following their primary trade routes and communication networks. It was not just killing, it was dismantling a civilization, piece by piece. And at the center of that spiral was Cygnus Alpha, the hegemony's military heart. It was a slow, methodical march toward a final, decisive annihilation. Her brief contact had also done something else, something she hadn't intended. By projecting her own consciousness into the swarm, she had given it a new template. The echoes she'd witnessed were not just memories, they were the beginnings of adaptation. The plague was learning from her. It was beginning to think. The small, isolated pockets of nanites that had seemed dormant were now beginning to coalesce, to experiment. In a desolate asteroid field, one such cloud encountered a wrecked hegemony probe. Instead of deconstructing it, the nanites flowed over it, infiltrating its systems, repairing its damaged hull not with metal, but with their own gray, featureless matter. The probe's dead optical sensors flickered to life, glowing with an empty, violet light. The plague was no longer just a tide of erasure. It was learning to build. It was learning to possess. And Ilara Vance, the last human, had just taught it how. The penumbra's descent through Earth's ravaged atmosphere was a journey through a ghost trichia. The air was a toxic cocktail of radioactive isotopes and chemical residue, a permanent, planet-wide shroud that glittered with suspended dust. Below, the surface was a monochromatic nightmare of gray, glassed-over deserts and the skeletal remains of cities that clawed at the sky like the fossilized fingers of a dead god. There was no life here, only the deep, profound silence of a world that had screamed itself hoarse and then died. Ryan navigated the ship with a surgeon's precision, her eyes flicking between the external sensors and the triangulated signal vector. The radiation is interfering with our short-range scanners, she reported, her voice steady despite the oppressive view. But the signal source is stationary. We are descending directly on top of it, subterranean, approximately 3 kilometers deep. The ship landed in a vast, frozen crater that had once been an ocean, the ice a dirty, cracked pane stretching to the horizon. The moment its landing struts touched down, a section of the crater floor directly ahead of them hissed, and a perfectly square section of ice and rock descended into the ground, revealing a darkened tunnel lined with an alloy that absorbed all light. It was an invitation. "It knows we're here," Koro whispered, his hand resting on the console that controlled the ship's tactical systems. "Praetor, this is too clean. It is a dialogue," Jax corrected, his gaze fixed on the yawning entryway. "It sent a message. We answered. Now it has opened the door." He turned from the viewport. "I am going alone." "That is tactically unsound," Rian stated, her tone flat but with an undercurrent of protest. "We do not know what is down there. We know it is the only thing in this universe that can give us an answer, Jax replied. He sealed the helmet of his envirosuit, the hiss of compressed air a lonely sound in the tense silence of the bridge. If I do not return in 3 hours, or if you detect any aggression from the facility, your orders are to withdraw to the Silent Zone perimeter and transmit my full mission logs to Inquisitor Kalen. Do you understand? Ryan gave a curt, reluctant nod. Jax stepped into the airlock, a single, stark figure against the desolation of a dead world, on his way to meet the architect of his species' extinction. The tunnel was not a tunnel. As Jax stepped through the threshold, the world behind him vanished, the entryway sealed, and the interior lit up, not with lamps, but with a soft, ambient glow that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The air was breathable, cool, and sterile. He was in a long, featureless corridor that stretched into the distance. He walked, his footsteps the only sound, the rhythmic clank of his armored boots, a stark contrast to the absolute silence. This was not a military base. It was a sepulcher. It was a place of deep, old quiet. After what felt like a kilometer, he reached a circular chamber. In the center stood a single cryopod, its transparent lid frosted over. Monitors flickered around it, displaying the looping, desperate plea he had followed across the void. As he approached, the frost on the pod began to melt, revealing the figure within. It was a human female, her face pale, her form frail, looking more like a preserved specimen than a living being. And as the last of the ice vanished, her eyes opened. They were blue, the color of Earth's long dead oceans, and they were filled with an exhaustion so profound it seemed to transcend time itself. Elara Vance sat up, the hiss of the pod's seals breaking the silence. She looked at the towering, alien figure before her, his form encased in sleek, black armor, his face hidden behind a polarized visor. She saw the angular lines of Aethelian design, the unmistakable silhouette of the species that had triggered the end of her own. And yet, he was alone. He was not here to conquer. "You received my message," she said, her voice a raw, unused whisper. "I did," Jax replied. His own voice filtered through his helmet's external speaker, calm and measured. "I am Praetor Jax of the Aethelian hegemony. I have come to understand the nature of the weapon that is unmaking my people." Elara slowly swung her legs over the side of the pod, her movements stiff and uncertain. "Its name is Memento Mori, and it is not a weapon. It is a ghost." She told him everything. She told him about the vault, the archive, the final, spiteful act of a dying world. She explained the anchor protocol, how her own life force served as a beacon for a plague of genocidal machines. And she told him of her terrifying discovery that her contact with the swarm had changed it, given it a seed of her own consciousness, and that it was now learning, adapting, evolving beyond its original programming. As she spoke, Jax listened without interruption. He did not remove his helmet, but she could feel the intensity of his focus. He was not just hearing her words, he was dissecting them, analyzing them, searching for a flaw in the logic of their shared doom. "You believe it is moving to attack our core worlds," he said when she had finished. "It is not a belief. It is a certainty," she confirmed, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "I can feel its path, a slow, methodical spiral. It is dismantling your civilization, and it will not stop until every trace of your species' signature has been erased from existence." Jax was silent for a moment, processing. There is an inelegance to its strategy. A direct assault on our primary military hub would be a war of attrition. This weapon has shown a preference for subtlety, for absolute annihilation without conflict. This spiral, it feels less like a military campaign and more like a pilgrimage. Elara looked at him, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. What do you mean memento mori is a monument to your species' grief? Jax stated, his words precise. It is an emotional force given physical form. Its actions would be dictated not by cold strategy, but by the echoes of that emotion. What is at the center of this spiral? What is the one place it would be drawn to? A place that represents the absolute heart of the trauma it was born from. The realization dawned on Elara with the force of a physical impact. She turned to the central console, her fingers flying across the dusty interface, pulling up star charts she had only ever seen in historical archives. She overlaid the projected path of the swarm with the known map of the Aethelian hegemony. And then she saw it. The spiral was not centered on the military might of Cygnus Alpha. It was converging on a small, unassuming yellow star system on the far edge of hegemony space. A system with a single, life-bearing world. A world the Aethelians had settled centuries ago. A world they had named New Dawn. A world that, according to the ancient, pre-collapse human star charts, had once been called Tau Ceti. It was the destination of Earth's first and only interstellar colony ship, the Odyssey, launched a decade before the fall, a ship that had gone silent, presumed lost. Its 1,000 colonists believed to be the first human casualties of the void. They weren't lost, Elara whispered, her voice trembling. The hegemony. They found them. They must have. Jax's posture stiffened. The official Aethelian histories were clean, sterile. They spoke of empty worlds, of a galaxy ripe for peaceful expansion. There was no mention of a pre-existing sentient species at Tau Ceti. It was a lie, a foundational lie upon which their entire empire had been built. Their expansion had not been peaceful. It had begun with a slaughter. The desecration of the Titan Vault was not the first crime. It was the second. And Memento Mori was not heading for a battle. It was going home. It was being drawn to the site of humanity's first murder, to the place where its grief had truly begun. And the evolving, learning swarm, seeded with Elara's own consciousness, was not just going to erase the Aethelians there. It was going to do something far, far worse. It was going to build something new from their dust. The revelation hung in the cold air of the sanctuary, a truth so monumental it seemed to bend the very fabric of the room. The Aethelian hegemony was not an empire of benevolent order keepers. It was a dynasty built on a forgotten grave. New Dawn was not a fresh start. It was a desecrated tombstone. For Jax, the truth was a deconstruction event of his own, dissolving the foundations of his identity, his culture, his entire existence. He finally understood the plague's cold, methodical rage. It was not the anger of a warrior. It was the grief of an archaeologist discovering that the bones of their ancestors had been ground into the foundations of their enemy's palace. He slowly reached up and unsealed his helmet, revealing a face that was both alien and achingly familiar in its expression of dawning horror. His skin was a pale, alabaster gray, his features sharp and angular, but his eyes dark, intelligent, and now wide with a terrible clarity, held the same shock that Elara felt in her own heart. "My people have a saying," he said. his voice now unfiltered, a low, resonant baritone. The cleanest records hide the deepest stains. We have spent 1,000 years sterilizing our history. Elara looked from his face to the star chart, her mind racing. This changes everything. Memento Mori isn't just erasing your people out of revenge. It's being drawn to that colony, to the final echo of humanity. And with the consciousness it has, copied from me, it's not just going to destroy New Dawn. It's going to replace it. It will use the deconstructed matter of your colonists to rebuild the Odyssey's crew. It will create a haunted, synthetic parody of a human colony, a silent monument built from the ashes of its murderers, a permanent, living scar on the face of the galaxy. The horror of the image was absolute, a world of silent, gray figures walking through recreated streets, their forms built from the dust of their victims, forever acting out a memory of a life they never had. It was a hell of a uniquely human design. "We have to stop it," Jax said, the words tasting like heresy on his tongue. He was no longer a praetor of the hegemony. He was a witness to its sins, and he could not allow this final, grotesque desecration to be its legacy. How Elara asked, her voice laced with despair. "I am its anchor, but I am not its master. I cannot command it, only feel it. And it can feel me. It knows what I know. It knows we are here. It knows we understand." As if on cue, a low thrum vibrated through the floor of the sanctuary. On the main monitor, the repeating distress call vanished, replaced by a live feed from the penumbra's external cameras. The gray, frozen landscape outside was no longer still. The ice was cracking, the rock shifting, as if the entire planet was waking from a long slumber. "It is here." Ryan's voice crackled over Jax's helmet comm, strained with panic. "The plague. It is not in space. Praetor, it is coming out of the ground." Jax and Elara watched the monitor, transfixed. A formless, gray tide was seeping up from the planet's irradiated soil, a roiling cloud of nanites that had lain dormant for 3 centuries, a hidden reservoir of the plague left to guard its creator's tomb. The swarm coalesced, forming a massive, swirling vortex around the landed penumbra. It wasn't attacking. It was waiting. "It's trapping us," Elara whispered. "It knows we are the only 2 beings in the universe who understand the truth. It will keep us here, preserved in this tomb, as eternal witnesses to its work. The ultimate irony, the historian, and the penitent sinner, locked away together in a museum at the end of the world." But Jax's mind, honed by a lifetime of Aethelian logic and strategy, was already running through the variables. "No," he said, turning from the screen to face her. "It has made a tactical error. It has concentrated a significant portion of itself in one location. Here, its connection to you is its strength, but it is also its weakness. You are the anchor. Memento Mori is a ghost chained to its grave. If the grave is destroyed, the ghost might be set free." Elara stared at him, understanding and terror dawning simultaneously. "You want to destroy the sanctuary. Destroy me." "I want to sever the chain," he corrected gently. "This facility has a self-destruct protocol. Does it not a final, absolute contingency?" Elara nodded numbly, gesturing to a sealed panel on the far wall. The Fallgate Protocol, a singularity generator designed to collapse the entire facility into a microscopic point of space-time, erasing it from existence so completely that not even a memory would remain. It was the ultimate act of historical deletion. "It will destroy the planet," she said. This world is already dead, Jax countered. It is a tomb that is poisoning the galaxy. To stop Memento Mori, we must remove its existential center of gravity. We must remove its humanity. The choice was stark and absolute. To save the future, they had to annihilate the last remnants of the past. There was a profound, tragic poetry to it that only a historian could truly appreciate. Alara looked at Jax, at this alien who had crossed a galaxy to find answers and had found only shame and a shared doom. In his eyes, she did not see a monster or a conqueror, but a reflection of her own weary soul. They were two ghosts from two dead worlds, standing at the final crossroads. There is not enough time to escape, she said, her voice heavy with acceptance. The singularity will form in less than 2 minutes. We will be consumed with it. Jax gave a slow, solemn nod. I know. He turned and spoke into his comm. Ryan, Koro, my final order. The moment you detect the singularity event, engage the drive. Do not wait for me. Transmit the full, unredacted history of the Tau Ceti colony to every open channel in the hegemony. Tell them the truth. The clean records are now open for all to read. A moment of static. Then Ryan's voice, thick with emotion. Acknowledged. Praetor, it was an honor. Jax removed his comm unit and let it fall to the floor. There were no more orders to give. He looked at Ilara. I am sorry for what my people did. I am sorry for what my people built, she replied. Together, they walked to the final console. Ilara placed her palm on the scanner. The panel hissed open, revealing a single, glowing red activator. The system required 2 unique biosignatures to arm one from the anchor and one from a designated external trustee. It was a failsafe she had never known existed. The facility had been designed for a moment just like this, for a human and a non-human to agree that the end was necessary. As they both placed their hands on the activator, the facility's female, synthetic voice spoke for the first and last time. Fallgate protocol initiated. Singularity formation in 120 seconds. Farewell. The world outside the sanctuary dissolved into a tempest of gray matter as Memento Mori realized what was happening. The swarm threw itself against the facility's energy shields, a silent, desperate tantrum of a billion, trillion raging ghosts. Aboard the Penumbra, Ryan watched her screens turn to static as the nanite storm blinded them. Hold steady, she commanded Koro, her hands gripping the pilot's yoke. On my mark. In the final seconds. Ilar and Jax did not speak. They simply stood together in the heart of the tomb, the last human and the first penitent Aethelian. 2 solitary figures awaiting absolution. The light from the core began to intensify, not a light of heat or energy, but a light of pure, crushing gravity. The walls of the sanctuary began to bend inward, the metal groaning as space-time itself came undone. Ilara closed her eyes, and, for a fleeting moment, the screaming in her head went quiet. The ocean of grief receded, and she felt a profound, unexpected peace. Memento Mori was not just a weapon of vengeance. It was the pain of a lost child. And now, finally, it was being allowed to rest. The singularity bloomed, a perfect sphere of blackness that consumed the sanctuary. Then the ice, then the rock, then the entirety of the dead planet Earth in a single, silent instant. The Penumbra, pushed by the shockwave of collapsing reality, shot away from the event, its engines screaming as Ryan pushed them to their absolute limit. Where the third planet of the Sol system had once been, there was now only a placid, empty void. And across the galaxy, the silent plague ceased. The gray tides receded. The possessed probes fell dormant. The creeping, silent erasure simply stopped. On New Dawn, the Aethelian colonists looked up at their sky, unaware that the silent, creeping doom that had been heading for them had vanished. But their ignorance would not last. As the penumbra fled the dead system, it began its broadcast. The truth, raw and uncensored, flowed into the hegemony's networks. The story of the Odyssey, the slaughter at Tau Ceti, the lies of 1,000 years. It was a plague of a different kind, a contagion of truth that would deconstruct their civilization, not from without, but from within. The Aethelian hegemony would not be erased by nanites. It would be undone by its own history. The galaxy would not be clean. But for the first time in a millennium, it might have a chance to be honest. And in the empty space where Earth once spun, all was finally, truly silent.